Hey guys, this is Kenjiro and welcome to another PaintShop Pro video. Today we're looking at creating some artistic effects in images by doing hue reduction. And there's two different methods we're going to be talking about with the hue reduction. One is going to be doing selective desaturation and the other is going to be hue convergence. So let's get to it. Now before we get started, I do want to at least just mention that probably the most common and the simplest way to do hue reduction is to go to Adjust, Hue Saturation, and Colorize. And in doing so, you can select a specific color, and essentially what it's going to do is just overlay that color atop whatever the existing lightness is. This is often used for sepia toning and other situations where you just want a very flat sort of color. Now, the techniques that I'm going to show are a little bit different because they still, even though they kind of reduce hue quite a bit, they're still going to allow some of like either the original color or some variants of that hue so that the image doesn't feel so flat. So the first technique that I'm going to show is selective desaturation. So to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate the original layer just so that we can see the difference with the original. Then with the duplicated layer selected, we want to go to Adjust, Hue Saturation, and Hue Saturation and Lightness. And essentially what the technique is identifying all the different color spectrums, at least that are available as a selectable, hue within this range, and desaturating the parts that we don't want. And what this can do is allow you to either select down to maybe 2 hues or even just 1 hue. It just depends on which one what type of look you're trying to target, and we'll see how we can get kind of both as we go through this process. So in this particular case, what I want to do is kind of isolate the male figure with the car. You can see he has sort of the peach orangey skin and then the blue jeans, and we're going to try to pull down all this green. So then what we'll want to do is say we'll start with greens, and then we're just going to pull that saturation all the way down. Then maybe switch to cyan, pull that saturation all the way down. And oh, by the way, you can also kind of do a little bit of tweaking just by doing some slight hue adjustments on that cyan sort of range. Then we could go to magenta, bring that all the way down. Go to reds, bring it all the way down. But see, in this case though, what we can see is by bringing reds down, it kind of messed up our skin color. So we'll bring that back up. Maybe we'll pass over the red in this particular case. Maybe switch to the yellows, bring that down a bit, and that seems to have less effect on our skin tone, but again, we can do a little bit of tweaking on it if we want to here. So then what you can see now is we have, without doing any selections or masks or anything, we've basically reduced the hue range of this image to just blue and the orangey color. And if we wanted to take this even further and reduce it down to just a single hue, then we can go back to the blues and then bring that down as well. And now what you have is this very sort of purely grayscale image save for just the brownish orangey colors. And then this just gives a very unique kind of artistic look, and it simplifies the color palette of your image. So now, since I wanted to demonstrate this sort of technique on a few different images, I've actually created a script that just does that one sort of reduction and maintaining the orange. So let's take a look at it on a couple of images. So we have this image here. You can see it has quite a bit of color variance all around, especially in the background. And so now if I were to run this sort of selective saturation script on it, what we'll see is it really kind of makes the whole color scheme of the image more uniform, right? We have these grays, we have these oranges, and the skin tone is still preserved. If we take this image of this very old bookcase in this sort of very wooden kind of cabin looking place, you can see it's already got a very orangey feel, but when we run the script on this image as well, you can see it really, again, just normalizes that color scheme, and even this sort of greenish table got muted so that it stands out less and becomes less distracting in the image. One final example, but just not focusing on orange per se, we can go to Hue Saturation and Lightness. And another way you can sort of preserve presets so you don't have to manually do them every time is just by saving something as a preset. So you can see I have the exclude orange as a preset, but I also have exclude cyan. So then if I do that one, essentially what I've done is muted everything except for the cyan and green, and you can see same thing but just different color scheme. Alright, so the next hue reduction technique we're going to look at is hue convergence. And how we're going to do this is by using the Hue Map. So the first thing we're going to do once again is duplicate, just so that we can see the difference in the end. And in this case we're going to want to bring up Adjust, Hue Saturation, and Hue Map. And essentially what we're going to be doing is taking all the colors in the scene except for maybe one or so and mapping them all to roughly the same color. So like in this case, I do want to preserve the skin tones of the gal sitting in the road, so I'm going to be leaving the orange slider roughly where it is, but we're really going to be bringing everything else to a sort of like purpley color, something that's matching maybe these flowers. So I'm just going to begin adjusting these sliders, and then we'll talk about exactly why we ended up where we did in just a second. Alright, so that's close enough. So what we've done is we've said, you know what, let's keep everything that's sort of red and orange, their respective color, but all these other colors and everything kind of in between, as they exist in the image, map them to something that is, you know, a purpley pink in nature. So that's how you can see all of the greenery and all of the leaves that were yellow, all those kinds of things. Pretty much everything that isn't of sort of a similar orangey brownish hue got changed to something pink. And now this is an example of a two hue image, a two hue reduction. So we basically said the two colors we're going to preserve are orange and purple. However, you could reduce everything down to, you know, all purple if you wanted to. It's still going to be a little bit different than a colorize, so long as you have some variation in the hue map. If you made everything exactly the same value in here, then it would be essentially the same as doing a colorize. Personally, I think two color hue reductions have a really neat look to them. I have some presets that I have created just to demonstrate using complementary colors. So once again, here's the pink and orange like from the previous image, but if we were to switch to say orange and blue, you can see the kind of effect that that has, or like a red and green. And once again, what you can see is there's just two very clear steps of where I'm saying all of these colors are green and all of these colors are red. And finally, yellow and purple. And one thing I'll say while we're looking at this particular image is that to really experience the full effect of these hue map reductions, you want an image that has a lot of saturation to begin with. If, for example, you had a much more muted or drier image, if you will, the effect will still work. You'll still get a very much, you know, two hue kind of effect going on. It's just it won't be as obvious. One last thing I'll point out about this particular technique is that when you have a very colorful image, like, you know, what we have here, where there's like the full spectrum of the rainbow is represented, even when you do these sort of color splits, there's still going to be places possibly where the colors are going to blend, like even the yellow and purple are going to blend, and you're going to end up with some colors that kind of fall in between. Generally speaking, you're still predominantly going to get the colors that you have mapped in your hue map, but just recognize that there's going to be some points that probably aren't going to perfectly fall in the colors that you defined. Anyway, that's it for this one. I think this technique can go really well, especially if you're working on some type of graphic media that has a defined color scheme and you want your images to, match it, but still have a very natural feel to it. I think these techniques can provide that. Changing the color can completely change the feel of an image, so it can be applied there. But just do some experimentation. I showed just some basic examples of color schemes. I'm sure you can come up with much better ones than the ones I've come up with. For those who are patrons on my Patreon account, I'm going to provide some of the presets that I've demonstrated here for you to download. Anyway, that's it for me. If you have any questions or would like to suggest content, feel free to leave a comment. If you'd like to get updates on new material, click the subscribe button. And if you'd like to support me and the channel, check out my Patreon page, which is on the link on the screen, and I'll see you guys next time.